Hello friends and welcome to the channel. In this video I would like to go over the phase 1 of the Dragonsong's Reprise Ultimate. Two disclaimers real quick. If you haven't completed Heavensward, then please do just click away from this video as it will contain spoilers. The second disclaimer is these strats are very early strats and these strats could change in the coming days/weeks of this fight being released, so just keep that in mind. With that out of the way, let us begin. We will spend the majority of phase 1 against Sir Grinox and Sir Alderfell. We are going to name these the Warrior and the Paladin going forward because it's easier to say that and it's also just easier to identify what job they are. We want to begin the fight by positioning these ads directly in the middle of the room. This is going to make it easier to handle certain mechanics and you'll see that in just a moment. The first ability we will encounter is from the Paladin and is Holiest of Holies. This is simply a raid wide, but you should be mitigating this with reprisals, feints, addles and the likes. These will happen throughout the encounter, so just make sure that you are rotating your raid utility appropriately. The next two mechanics you will encounter is Empty Dimension from the Warrior. This will always be Empty Dimension. This is simply a donor AoE around the Warrior, so make sure that the group is either close to his hitbox or inside his hitbox. You'll see exactly where the safe spot is in the footage. You'll also notice this tether from the Paladin. This tether must be picked up by one of the tanks and faced away from the group. It's going to do really heavy damage to the tank, and honestly for the most part you just want to be invulning this. It's also going to stun you, as you'll see in the footage. Next up, the Paladin will disengage from the arena and will no longer become targetable, and the Warrior will dash to the middle of the arena and he will cast Hyperdimensional Slash. Now you're going to see that it's going to put these markers above 4 random players' heads. It is completely random, there is no role priority, it's just going to be outright 4 random players. Now we have waymarks for this, and the first 4 markers are going to put these marks on the first north waymarkers, which are the numbered waymarkers in this instance. Now there is plenty of time to adjust and handle this mechanic to place them appropriately on the waymarkers without overlapping each player, and you're going to see that in the footage. Meanwhile, players who didn't get the marks should be positioning behind the boss, as the boss is going to do a cleave, which is shared damage amongst the remaining 4 players. Now the group that just did the marks are now going to have to stack in front of the boss, and the group that just took the shared cleave will now get the marks instead. So the people with the marks are going to do exactly what the first set of people with the marks did, but instead they're going to place their marks at the south of the arena, and in this instance it is the alphabetical waymarks. Meanwhile, the group that already handled their marks are now going to take the stack cleave, so that's why this group is going to position in front of the boss to share that together. Now you'll notice these black holes around the map. These are really important because in an upcoming mechanic, if the boss dashes into these, it's going to cause a wipe. Also, if you get too close to these black holes, they're going to tether to you, give you a damage down, and potentially kill you as well. So you really do just want to be careful with these black holes, but you'll see that in the footage. For now, let's quickly do a simulation of what we just did, but in Raid Planner. I have a simulation prepared here, and what we're going to do is we're going to give the marks to 4 random players in this simulation. The 4 random marks that we'll give is 1 to the Monk, 1 to the Warrior, 1 to the Dark Knight, and 1 to the Black Mage. So what these players need to do is obviously go to their waymarks because they're the first set. So we'll go to the next page, and as you can see, the Monk is in position here, the Warrior position here, the Dark Knight in position here, and the Black Mage is in position here. Meanwhile, the rest of the party is stacked behind the boss, and they can actually already pre-position to what mark they want to take. For instance, you can see that the White Mage is at the very left, so they're going to go on D, and the Ninja is at the very right, so they're going to go on A. This is just an easy way for the second set to handle the marks without having to be so free flow. So the Hyperdimensional Slash has gone out, it's hit these 4 players at the north end of the arena, and we'll go to the next page. These 4 players are now going to tuck in front of the boss to take that stack cleave. Meanwhile, the 4 players that took the stack cleave previously are now going to have marks, and they're going to take them to their designated waymark here. The Hyperdimensionals will go out again, the stack cleave will go out again as well, and there's going to be the black holes in appropriate spots around the map, and that's pretty much that mechanic solved. Next up, the Paladin will reappear onto the arena in a random cardinal direction. This can be either north, east, south, or west, so make sure you pan your camera around the arena, find the Paladin, and go opposite of him because he is casting a Holiest of Holies, which is a proximity-based damage Holiest of Holies, unlike the previous one, so the further away you are from him, the less damage it's going to deal. The easy way to do this is, like I said, go opposite of the Paladin and max melee range yourself yourself onto the warrior. If you're arranged, maybe just go a little bit further or on top of your melee and you'll be fine. Meanwhile, the warrior is going to be casting a Faith Unmoving, and this is a knockback, but you can pop your anti-knockbacks, and you should as well. So that includes arm's length and shortcast. So make sure to pop those as well so you do not get knocked back. Once that's gone off, move as a group slightly back and watch the Paladin. You'll see that in this footage, he dashed to the right side of the map first. So we want to simply dodge a little bit into the right side of the map. He's also spawning these orbs, which will explode into massive AoEs. So it's really simple here. All we do is slightly move to the right because he dashed to the right side first. And it's only a slight movement, and you'll see that in the footage, all the way to the waymark. We stay here, and the Dark Knight is going to move forward because the Paladin is going to do a massive tank buster on the Dark Knight, or whoever is tanking the Paladin at the time. So if you are tanking the Paladin at the time, make sure that once the Paladin has finished doing his dashes, like in the footage, move away from your group. What we do as a group is the group stays and the Dark Knight moves forward. If any party member does get hit by this, it's going to either outright kill them, or if it doesn't kill them, it's going to send them flying into the Walls arena, which will kill them. Let's just run a quick simulation of that. So first off, the warrior is the entire group and the Dark Knight is just the Dark Knight. So just keep that in mind. The Paladin spawned at this side of the arena. He casted his Holiest of Holies, and the warrior's doing his Faith Unmoving. We pop our anti-knockbacks, we pop our raid mitts, and the Paladin then dashes to the right side of the arena. So what we do here as a group is we move to the right side of the arena here, making sure that we're not getting clipped by the big AoEs or getting too outside of the arena and taking the black holes. And then once the Paladin has finished dashing, the Dark Knight will move forward while the group stays, and the Dark Knight will take the tank buster and the group will be nice and safe. Once we've solved that mechanic, the Paladin is going to cast Holiest Hallowing, and this is going to be a massive heal on the warrior, but this can be interrupted, so make sure that we are interrupting this as tanks or ranged DPS. They will be free throughout the fight, and you cannot interrupt two back to back, so make sure you are rotating your interrupts appropriately. After that, make sure to move both bosses back into the center of the arena, as the warrior is going to do another Faith Unmoving, and if he isn't in the center of the arena, that is going to be pretty bad. Once we have both of the bosses in the middle of the arena, make sure that we do a loose spread around the bosses so we can see ourselves clearly. This is very important for an eminent mechanic that's about to happen. Now you're going to see that we all have these markers above our heads. You'll see there's a blue X, a red circle, a purple square, and a green triangle. Now this is where the waymarks also really come in handy. What we do here is our group personally, we correlated the color of our mark above our head to what waymark we're going to get pushed into. Because what these marks basically mean is you are going to get chained to the same symbol as you. So in this instance, I have an X above my head and so does my white mage. So that means we're going to be chained together. In this instance, it would be easier for me to get knocked back into C and for my white mage to get knocked back into free. You'll notice that C and free are both blue and our marks above our heads are also blue. So that's the science to this mechanic. We're getting knocked back into the appropriate color of the mark above our head. Now you need to get knocked back this way because if you don't break the chains, it's going to be bad. So make sure you get knocked back because the warrior is going to do a Faith Unmoving here. This should automatically break the chain, but if not, move a little bit further back and then break the chain. Once you've done that, everyone's going to get a splash damage AoE on them called Heaven's Flame. So really make sure that you aren't next to another player as you will double clip each other and kill each other. After that mechanic is solved, move the bosses back to the middle of the arena. Let's run a little simulation just in case you didn't get that. So this won't be completely exact to what just happened in the footage, but it will show you a rough example of what we should be doing as each and every single player. So in this instance, we've done a loose spread around the boss and we see the waymarks above our heads. So we're going to place ourselves so we get knocked back into the particular waymark that we have of the color that we have above our head. So just like this, we're now ready to be knocked back into the waymark, correlating to the color of the mark above our head. Then we get knocked back, we're all spread out, we're not going to double clip each other, we might move back a little bit more just to make sure that chain does really break. And once we've done that, the AoEs are going to go off and we're not going to double clip each other, and that is pretty much that mechanic. At this point, it's more or less a DPS check. Just kill both of the bosses down and you'll be good. But there is one difference here. The warrior is going to do an empty dimension or a full dimension. Now, empty dimension is the donut AoE that he did at the very start of the fight, but full dimension, and you're going to see a example here, is a AoE around his hitbox instead. This one can be max melee range though, so if you are a melee, make sure that you just max melee range this attack when you see full dimension being casted. And if it's empty dimension, just make sure to be inside the boss's hitbox. The Paladin will also cast more Holiest of Holies and Holiest Hallowing, so just keep an eye on him. Make sure you're popping your raid mitts and make sure that you are interrupting those Holiest Hallowing. If both ads aren't defeated in time, they will enrage and just outright kill the party, so make sure to get the HP down all the way to 0%, otherwise you will wipe. After that, the ads will disengage from you. They will then appear back onto the map. The warrior is going to chain every single party member into a small circle. You cannot leave the circle or you will die, by the way, and the only targetable enemy is Sir Charibert at this point. He's going to cast an ability called Pure of Heart, and this ability is simply going to be a raid-wide. The more damage you deal to him, the less damage this is going to deal, I believe, so make sure that you are hitting the boss at this point. But the main mechanic here is he's going to do 2 cleaves on the closest players to him, and then once you have been cleaved by this attack, it's going to drop this debuff on you, which is a ticking time bomb. Once that debuff has expired, you will then drop a bomb AoE underneath you, which will shortly explode. So once that debuff has expired, make sure to move out and safely avoid that bomb. Also make sure not to put this in the pathing of another player because it can kill them as well, and you don't really want that. Also, there will be consistent raid-wide damage going out throughout this phase, so just make sure that you are popping any raid mitts you have left and make sure that healers are aware of this and keeping the party topped up. Also, he will do 8 of these cleaves throughout this phase, so make sure that you are rotating rolls for each set of cleaves because you cannot take 2 after each server. So how my group did it is we had healers in first to bait the first cleaves, and then we had the range DPS, then we had tanks, and then we had melee to finally finish it off. Now you see exactly what those bombs are like as they caught me and killed me, but we did enough damage to the boss, we had enough people alive, and we managed to reach Forden without an entire party wipe, and that's fine because then we can just run into the wall, reset the fight, and we'll be at a checkpoint. So I'm just going to run a simulation of what we do real quick. The first thing is, of course, we're spread out, and then the first set of cleaves are going to go out, so we have our healers position, get those cleaves outside the arena, and then make sure that they're dropping their bombs somewhere just off in the distance, nowhere that's going to hit anyone. Ranged go in during this point, they're going to bait their cleaves, and then the ranged are then going to drop their bombs. Make sure they don't drop it where the healers drop it, because while they're dropping their bombs, the healer bombs are then going to go off, and if they're close to that, then they're going to die. So just make sure that you're changing the spot every time here. Meanwhile, the tanks will go in and bait their cleaves, and then once the ranged have dropped their bombs and the tanks have took their cleaves, the tanks are then going to go sort of max melee at this particular point here, and then they're going to drop their bombs. Meanwhile, the melees are going to go in and bait their cleaves. Then once the melees have baited their cleaves, the tanks will just go into the group, and the melees can stay put and actually just drop their bombs here, and that's absolutely fine. And then once the melees have dropped their bombs, they can then go back in with the group and then just focus on killing the boss. And that, my friends, will just about wrap up phase 1. I will do videos for each and every single phase once we have got through them, and I have studied all of the mechanics and how they work for every single role and all that stuff. So I will be making sure to go over each phase in a guide format, phase by phase, and once we've done that, we'll then make a massive guide and just compile it all into one video. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. That would really help me a bunch. If you aren't subscribed yet and you like my content, then please do consider hitting subscribe, because that really does also help me a bunch. If you have any feedback, anything like that, anything you think I missed, leave it in the comments below. I'd really appreciate that. If you'd like to support me any further, there are a few social links in the description below. There's a Twitch, a Twitter, and a Discord, so I would appreciate if you check those out. And with all that said and done, I will see you guys in the next one. So until then, make sure to take it easy, stay safe, we out, goodbye.